single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand for New York.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantal Destra. It was a historic primary election day on Tuesday. The biggest wins of the night came from Democratic insurgent candidates for Congress who were backed by New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani. The three candidates, Dereliza Avila Chavoulet, Brad Lander, and Claire Valdez, either beat incumbent representatives in their races or beat candidates endorsed by the Democratic establishment. The outcomes of these races showcase the political influence of the newly elected mayor and has political insiders curious about the future of the Democratic Party. To understand the wins of this year's primary elections, we are joined in the studio by John Campbell of WNYC, Gothamist, and the New York Public News Network, as well as Jason Beeferman of POLITICO. Here's that conversation. Thank you both so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And of course, it was an eventful primary night in New York. So before we get into the specific races, I wanted to get your perspective on the big revelations of the night and whether or not Zoran Mamdani is a kingmaker, as he's been dubbed.
It's kind of hard to say anything otherwise. I mean, he went 3 for 3 on his congressional endorsements, and he had a handful of state legislative endorsements and won all those as well. I mean, it really, really goes to show the power of his endorsement at this moment. He is a leading figure on the left flank of the party. He's a leading figure among the Democratic Socialists of America, whose power is clearly growing within New York City, and you're starting to see it outside of New York City as well. You saw Adam Bojack in the Buffalo area win a state legislative primary, and Mo Brown in Syracuse is neck and neck with Bill Magnarelli in the Syracuse area, and actually is a little ahead. It's looking very good for him. So this was a really big night for the left flank of the party, and the question is, how does that translate across the state, and how does that translate across the nation? I mean, there's a lot of establishment Democrats that are, I think, worried on now, 3-4 days after primary day.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, what about you?
I think Mamdani is someone that, the establishment is watching him and they're scared. And he's not just someone that endorses. He showed up to these 3 congressional races. He pounded the pavement. He did rallies with Bernie Sanders. So it's not just kind of like endorsement in name only. And I think that's frightening. There's a real get out the vote machine that the DSA has. And when you have Zoran Mamdani's name next to yours or his face next to yours on campaign literature, people are going to show up to the polls, particularly a young, energized base. And it's hard for the quote-unquote establishment when their base is older and just less fired up to compete with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Zoran Mamdani hitting the floor and campaigning for these candidates. We saw that certainly in NY13, where we saw a DSA insurgent candidate oust longtime Representative Adriano Espaillat. So how did we get to this point where this race was so competitive? I don't even think this was something that a lot of political insiders had been watching.
Yeah, I mean, this is Adriano Espaillat is the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He is a entrenched incumbent who had a long history in that district. He was defeated by Dereliza Avila Chavoulet, and she is a community organizer from the very left flank of the party. And you saw Zoran Mamdani get involved in that race in the closing weeks of the campaign. So obviously they saw something that was promising, and it played out in the election night results. I mean, that is going to be she's going to be one of the very leftmost members of Congress, representing a district that includes Upper Manhattan, part of the West Bronx. That is, that was probably the biggest upset of the night. Not probably, that was the biggest upset of the night. And that's one that really sent some shockwaves.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of people comparing that race, to AOC and Joe Crowley a few years back. Did you share that same sentiment?
Well, there's some similarities, but the big difference is AOC the night of, that was a shock, right? Dereliza, we saw Zoran Mamdani get involved, and that really, perked up our radar, right? I mean, that was something that made us realize, okay, this is going to be a tighter race than perhaps we thought, and we were aware of the possibility that that could happen. AOC defeating Joe Crowley, I mean, there's famous footage of her on New York One reacting when the results came in. She was just as shocked as the rest of us. This was a little different in that way.
And looking at NY10, we saw former New York City Comptroller Brad Lander, Best Representative Dan Goldman. And what was interesting for me, certainly, about this race was Brad Lander had just finished his New York City mayoral campaign just last year, and we saw Mamdani and Brad Lander on the streets endorsing one another and campaigning together. And certainly, this is a political ally of the mayor. So from your purview, how much of Mamdani's endorsement was him simply endorsing a political friend or strategy?
Yeah, this is a little different than the other two congressional races in that Brad Lander is not a Democratic Socialist. He's not a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, but he is, a progressive. He is left-leaning, very, very certainly. It's a little different, too, in that Brad Lander is very well known throughout that district. He used to represent the Park Slope area in Brooklyn in the city council. That's a big part of this district. And he was the city controller. So he had just as much name recognition, if not more, than Dan Goldman. And it was, really, it almost ends up being two incumbents going at it, even though Brad Lander's technically not an incumbent. So this was one where the polling leading up to it showed that Brad Lander had a large lead, and that played out in the results that came in that night.
Yeah, what were some of the big themes that came to the forefront in that particular race?
One of the big themes was Israel and its war in Gaza, and that was really a common theme among the three races where the mayor did endorse. And Brad Lander had come out against aid, both offensive and defensive aid for Israel. Dan Goldman had voted for aid for Israel in the past. But it goes to show the kind of the nationalization of some of these races. I mean, that is an issue that is, certainly a national, international issue that came to the forefront in this race. It was a big deal in that race. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And looking at NY7, that was an interesting race because we saw a matchup between Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso and Assemblymember Claire Valdez. So what did you make of this race, Jason?
I think, John mentioned that the biggest shock, the biggest upset of the night was Daria Lisa winning against Espaillat. I think for me, arguably, the same level of surprise, or if not more, was just the margin that Claire Valdez won against Antonio Reynoso. She won by over 20 points. This is a race where everyone thought this was going to be a toss-up. Claire Valdez, she's a Democratic Socialist. She's not very well known, like even in the state legislature. She's a junior lawmaker, like first or second term. And then Antonio Reynoso, he's the Brooklyn Borough President. He was in the city council. He has a real, in the political world, like a real name ID. And so people were calling reporters the day of, in the days before, saying, I think Antonio's going to win this. This is super close. He has the ground game. And then all of a sudden you watch the results come in election night. She beat him almost by as much as Brad Lander beat Dan Goldman. It was just an absolute trouncing from Claire. And it's so surprising because these candidates are so similar. They both call what's happening in Gaza a genocide. They both, are super progressive on all sorts of issues. But Claire has the Mamdani endorsement, and Claire is a Democratic Socialist. And I think we're really seeing a rejection of anyone that has that tint of establishment.
Yes.
And it was just remarkable how much she won by.
And what was interesting for me in particular was Reynoso had the endorsement of the retiring Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez. So what did you make of Mamdani's decision to go against the wishes of the sitting Congress member?
He was really taking a gamble. He was testing the sensibilities of the establishment and whether or not they, if he lost in that race, and also Adriano Espaillat with Daria Lisa, he promised Espaillat that he would support his reelection and not try to oust him. Then all of a sudden you have him trying to go against the wishes of the incumbent in Antonio's district, and he's also trying to oust an incumbent. He really was playing with fire, but it paid off. And I think it's a warning sign to all the other representatives in Brooklyn, even former Speaker Hakeem Jeffries. You better watch your back, because I'm not afraid. I don't care how long you've been in Congress. I'm not afraid to send my army to oust you.
That being said, though, the mayor was very calculated in the districts that he did pick to endorse. I mean, obviously, he picked districts where he thought he had a candidate who could win, and that played out. But to the point of Hakeem Jeffries, I mean, there was a point where Chiosei, a New York City councilman, was running against him, was planning to run against him, and Mayor Mamdani got involved and encouraged him to drop that race, did not offer his endorsement. There's this alternate universe to think about right now, where if Chiosei had continued his race, and that is a very liberal district in Brooklyn that Hakeem Jeffries represents, Hakeem Jeffries at this point is in line to be the first black Speaker of the House should Democrats take control of the House in the fall. What happened if Chiosei would have kept going and Mayor Mamdani got behind him and the DSA got behind him? I mean, we could be talking about an alternate history right now.
Yeah. And what did you make of the race in which Mamdani chose not to make any endorsements in NY12?
Well, that's a district that is very different than the other three districts that we've been talking about. It is, it is progressive, but in a different way, right? I mean, there aren't as many younger voters as there are in some of those other districts, certainly in Brooklyn and Queens. And that is you had a very crowded race. You had 8 candidates running in that race. I mean, there were 3 or 4 that were more of the top tier, or the top 2 tiers. And Michael Lasher came out on top. He's a state assembly member who has worked for all sorts of establishment Democrats. He had support from Governor Hochul, who he worked for. He had support and a $10 million super PAC from Mayor Bloomberg, who he also worked for. He came out on top. He defeated Alex Boris, who was the subject of a lot of spending from the AI industry, either trying to tear him down or bring him up, because he passed a regulatory bill in Albany last year. And that's one where the establishment came out on top. We should also mention Jack Schlossberg, the grandson of John F. Kennedy. He was in that race. He finished a distant third.
I think there was a lot of enthusiasm behind Alex Boris. I think you could argue he was the populist candidate, kind of, and it shows you that even if the quote-unquote populist candidates won elsewhere in the city, it's not fait accompli. Lasher's real establishment, and we're going to see what he does in Washington.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today, but we thank you so much for your incredible reporting.
Thanks.
you. And we were speaking with Jason Beeferman of POLITICO and John Campbell of WNYC, Gothamist, and the New York Public News Network. And for more information on the primary elections in New York, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org. Now turning to another important topic. State lawmakers have been pushing a slew of bills to offer support for pet owners in New York. Those bills, if passed, would offer owners a tax credit for pet expenses, help simplify pet insurance, and help legalize bodega cats across the state. Our Elise Klein has more in this next story.
A variety of bills pushed by New York State lawmakers could improve the lives of New Yorkers' furry friends and their owners by addressing animal care in bodegas and pet affordability. During a legislative session, lawmakers introduced bills aiming to legalize bodega cats, establish a regulatory framework for pet insurance, and provide tax credits and exemptions for certain pet expenses. The policy to legalize bodega cats would require the establishment of health and safety guidelines, including spaying and neutering, vaccinations, and a safe, quiet place for the cat to sleep, drink fresh water, and eat healthy pet food. Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, Democrat representing parts of Manhattan and a lead sponsor of the bill, says bodega cats are often treated like workers, but they are not unionized and need representation for a healthy and safe environment.
Well, I think it would definitely keep the cats healthier, and also to know that someone's looking out for them, aside from the business.
Bodega cats have a long history in New York City especially. Dan Romana, founder of Bodega Cats of New York, a bodega cat archive, estimates likely 30 to 40% of the city's bodegas have cats. Ramada says this bill would have a significant impact for bodega cats and their owners because it would establish formal standards to ensure protections for cats and help owners avoid expensive penalty fees for housing bodega cats.
So it sets up for the first time ever actual care standards. So it says to a bodega owner, if you want to have a cat, these are the standards. The standards of conduct you have to abide by.
For Hamoud Suleiman, manager of Mini Mart and More in Brooklyn, this bill wouldn't change his routine with his bodega cat Cleopatra, as she is well taken care of. But he stresses what the bill would mean is a higher standard of care for bodega cats, many of whom do not have good owners like Suleiman.
Honestly, I more so think about the kitties. I think about, cats maybe getting, holding the store owners responsible to be able to, provide for their cats the best way.
Suleiman adds Cleo, who just celebrated her first birthday last week, is a great cat who helps drive business. She enjoys helping with the checkout process, making friends with local pups and customers, and of course, rooting for the New York Knicks.
So she's definitely like the best companion for the place. She would greet us at the door. She'd greet a lot of customers at the door and or stand by the door or right outside, kind of, warming up to people when they pass by. She knows how to, that's why it's Cleopatra. She's very seductive. She gets the people in, holds them for like 30 minutes.
While New York City is the largest area of the state where this bill, if passed, would have an impact, it is a statewide policy, and some bodega cat owners outside of the city would also be impacted. Sajid Memon, owner of Natural Foods for about 15 years on Lark Street in Albany, says his nearly 4-year-old cat Moisa also helps drive business.
A lot of the customers, they just come to see her. Okay, they love her actually and her presence, and when they cannot find her, they get really upset like that. So they really love it.
Memon adds he hopes to see this legislation pass.
They should pass this law and so that it can be completely legal, and I don't see no disadvantage of it or it's only benefits I see.
While many owners like Memon and Suleiman take good care of their cats, there are many cats, especially in New York City, who are not cared for properly. Becky Wisdom, founder of Greenpoint Cats, a community nonprofit rescue organization in Brooklyn, says a large majority of bodega cats in the New York City boroughs are not properly cared for. She says they have, at this point, dealt with hundreds of cases of bodega cats who were unhealthy or sick as a result of poor care.
Unfortunately, the bodega cat issue consumes a large percentage of our time, whether that's directly, when we're directly dealing with bodegas where we know there's a cat that's actively reproducing or is not spayed and is in heat and is going out in the street and getting pregnant, or if it's a cat that's been just actively abandoned or a cat that's being actively mistreated.
Wisdom says while the statewide policy could be helpful, it doesn't go far enough. Wisdom adds the bill needs funding, education, and resources attached to it in order to be effective in its implementation.
Otherwise, you're just saying, here are the rules you have to follow, but I'm not going to actually provide you with any resources or tools or funding or anything, structure for you to actually follow those rules, which is like a recipe for failure. You're just setting people up to fail.
Some state lawmakers say they support this bill to further improve the health and safety of bodega cats.
A statewide effort is important. It's essential to make sure that we are doing this for every bodega, every city. When I was a city council member, I was trying to use every power I had as a city elected official to help move this conversation forward. And I'm glad that we've recognized the bodega cats here in the city, honor them, and also try to make them in compliance.
While some other state lawmakers have questions, such as what the fiscal impact will look like.
Are taxpayers footing the bill for this? Is it the local shop owner who owns a bodega who is going to get some sort of a credit or some kind of subsidy for housing this cat who happens to, reside in and near their store? Like, who's paying for this? How does this work?
The bill is currently stalled in the Assembly Agriculture Committee. The bill does not have a Senate version yet. Assemblymember Rosenthal says this year many legislative priorities such as this one were laid aside due to this year's very late state budget. She adds her efforts are ongoing to get this bill set up for success next session.
I have worked with the staff of the Agriculture Committee. I've spoken to advocates. So I'll continue to do that to make sure we have the best bill possible. And then forge ahead next session.
State lawmakers are also considering 2 bills that would exempt pet food from sales taxes and provide a tax credit for regular and medical pet expenses, going up to $450 for 1 pet and up to $900 for 2 pets annually. The two bills are also stalled in committees. State legislative sponsors say these bills would have had to go through the state budget process because they are related to taxation. However, too many competing priorities this year won out over these bills. Legislative sponsors of the bill to eliminate pet food from sales taxes say if passed next session, it would have a significant impact on pet owners' ability to afford their furry companions.
The cost of everything has been skyrocketing, including the cost of pet food and pet accessories. And our animals, our dogs, our cats, are part of our family. They're really important to keep. They bring us all together, and they're really an extended part of our family.
State Senator Natalia Fernandez, a Democrat representing parts of the Bronx and a lead sponsor, says her bill to provide a tax credit for certain pet expenses will also help improve pet affordability for New Yorkers.
Pets are our furry friends, our family friends, and we, as much as we, take care of one another, we give that same effort to our pets. So we know we're spending money on food, on maintenance, grooming and everything. On veterinary care, on emergency care, whatever accident may happen. And these bills really do add up. And sometimes because we know they're so expensive, it might prevent a pet owner from getting good care for their pet if they really need.
Many pet owners say it can be very costly to keep up with pet expenses. For Mickey DeLuca, a Waterville resident with 2 cats, Mongoose and Zuri, just feeding her girls is expensive.
They're not cheap. They require a very specific kind of food because they're picky about their kibble. But probably around, for just food, $150 a month-ish. And that's like no treats, which they get lots of.
Delaney Duval-Linehan, a Troy resident with a cat and a dog, Zelda and Violet, says she pays around $100 a week on pet food, and any assistance from the state could be very helpful.
I would say more when there's unexpected expenses, right after we adopted her, she had to have both of her lower canines removed. So you can see she doesn't have them. And that was $800.
Megan Dingman, a Troy resident with 2 pups, Molly and Bluey, says she drives over an hour away near her childhood home in Kanjahari to avoid expensive pet vet fees.
I go over an hour to my hometown because it's a very small community. And in that area, one time she had a UTI. It was between $60 to $90 for the test and the pill medication for her to be fine. And follow-up visits are free for that. And around here would have been over $300.
Some pet owners like Valentina Capone, an Albany resident, have pet insurance to help with veterinary expenses. However, she says it's not an easy process.
We pay whatever it is that we need to pay, and then we submit our expenses. And it's kind of really a guessing game of what they do and don't cover, because it's kind of really hard to understand all of the language and all of the terms and what is considered covered and not covered, what's an accident, what's not, I don't even know. So you just kind of submit the receipt and hope for the best, and then you still have a deductible anyway, so you're still basically paying out of pocket for the whole thing.
State lawmakers passed a bill in both houses to establish a regulatory framework around the issuance of pet insurance. Legislative sponsors of the bill say the policy will help clarify for consumers what pet insurance companies cover and what they don't.
People need to know exactly what they're getting relative to pet insurance, similar to healthcare. What is covered, what's not covered, that the language needs to be very clear.
Some pet owners say pet insurance has always been a big question mark.
I have definitely looked into it, but I have heard that for a lot of insurances, you need to cover the cost up front, which would be unfortunate. I think it'd be a lot more accessible to people if it kind of worked like regular insurance.
WMHT reached out to multiple pet insurance companies for this story. One company, Independent Pet Holdings, a corporate manager of various pet insurance companies, responded, stating they are supportive of the intent of the policy measure. For many owners, their pet is their family, and being able to afford care for them when they need it is important. For U.S. Navy vet Adam Shakirjan, his 10-year-old dog Charles helps guide him through post-traumatic stress disorder incidents.
And, as my service continued, I started to develop symptoms of PTSD, and I'm also turns out autistic. And so he's just, he's very in tune, especially because I had him at such a young age. And so he's just very good at adapting.
The bill passed unanimously in both houses this year, and it now awaits the governor's review. This isn't the first time, however, this bill will be heading to Governor Kathy Hochul's desk. The 2024 bill version was vetoed, the governor's veto message stating the bill is duplicative because pet insurance is already authorized and the new regulations could cause confusion. Hunter argues lawmakers looked into the governor's concerns and found that the state's current pet insurance statute only covers livestock or farm animals. Legislative sponsors say they feel they have addressed the executive chamber's concerns and are hopeful this time the bill will be signed into law.
we modified current language within the current statute so that it covers pet insurance, but still is exactly as they describe, so people understand what is pet insurance, what is covered, is it for wellness, is it preventative, and hope that with the modifications we made from last year's veto that we have listened, we put this language into existing law, modified it, and made clarification.
This bill has not yet been sent to the governor's desk. Once it has, Governor Hochul will have about 30 days to either sign or veto this bill. The other bills state lawmakers are considering will have to be taken up and reintroduced in the next legislative session for some of the bills, ideally during the state budget process. State lawmakers say they intend to keep the fight going, and state lawmakers' furry friends, I am told, are very supportive of their work on this issue. We'll be keeping an eye on all of these bill actions as they unfold. Elise Klein, New York Now.
Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,